All right, today we are going to be talking about Sodomy and Gomorrah, but you need a little bit of background first. Notice the heading there, a true story. Notice the subtitle, a nameless Baptist church. This is true, by the way, because in one church I was invited to actually address the subject of marriage and divorce. Now, I'm not going to touch on that much today, but in reality, our subject can be just as provocative. And the church had asked me to address the subject of marriage and divorce. So I did. Do you realise the Bible has got some hard-hitting things to say about marriage and divorce? It says God hates divorce. And it's a very unpopular subject. It says most of us are called to be married. And it's very, very blunt. It said, let every man have a wife to avoid sexual immorality, to avoid fornication. Bible's very pragmatic and practical. So John Mackay, being John Mackay, who apparently has a bit of a reputation for being bold and blunt and sometimes abrasive when he needs to be, actually gave the series, and the pastor came to me afterwards and said, "Oh, that was wonderful." I said, "Why?" He said, "Oh, that needed to be said." So I asked him, "Well, why didn't you say it?" He said, "Me? I work here." He said, "You can shoot and run." Now, today they have asked me to actually talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. And it will deal with a lot of homosexuality. It will deal with the Bible teaching on it. And of course, the subtitle was, Are You Born with a H Gene? Now you're wondering what qualifications would someone who normally goes around collecting rocks and fossils and talks about geology and Noah's flood and creation and runs Bible teaching sessions on all the above, what qualifications do I have to even talk about the genetics of it? I've shared quite a few times that I discovered early on that us people in geology, we were just undertakers, we dug up dead things. So I deliberately determined to also understand genetics. So I enrolled in Queensland University for 3 years of genetics, and I deliberately, in my third year, took the section on genetics and sex. I had several reasons for it. Studying what sexual trends are inherited was one purpose of it. There was a pragmatic purpose. You see, in my family, I was born with pyloric stenosis. And I wanted to find out what were the odds of my children being born with pyloric stenosis as well. And if you don't know what that is, ask me privately later. I'm still alive, but usually it can be fatal unless they find a pretty quick cure for the problem you are born with. Okay, so we have a nameless Baptist church which invited me to address a provocative subject. We have a named church tonight, whose name won't appear on the DVD, by the way, but you've asked me to talk about Sodom, Gomorrah and homosexuality. I suspect it's not because you're not bold enough to do it yourself, but you want to enjoy and hear and learn from what somebody else has observed around the planet. Okay, first of all, the headline news. I have a quote here from your local news. One of the people at the other end of the phone. You do realise this church wanted to put advertising in the local press. Are you born with the H gene? And the newspaper got back to you and said, the lawyers tell us not to do that. And of course, you tried to actually get them to say, well, are you born homosexual? And they said, the lawyers tell us we can't print that. And then your representative wanted to know why not. And their answer was, we cannot risk generating antagonism in the local community or offending any anti-discrimination body. Which means, of course, they can afford to offend you. Okay, do you realise that means they're discriminating against you in favour of discriminating against homosexuality? Okay, so you live in a world where the news is, in your local media, beware, you Christians are able to be discriminated against and there's not a thing you can do about it. You discriminate against the homosexuals and there's lots of things they can do about it. I've discovered this all around the planet. You see, I was invited to the Isle of Man and I discovered one interesting thing. They're not actually in England. They are a separate kingdom and they actually have their own rules. And one of them says you can disqualify anybody coming to the little country called the Isle of Man if they do anything regarded as offensive in your particular point of view. Now they discovered that John Mackay taught a particular non-acceptable standing on homosexuality. So they tried to get me blocked access to the Isle of Man. They didn't quite succeed, but what they did was frighten off the churches because the churches couldn't afford, you see, I could hit and run, but they had to stay there. So churches cancelled quite significantly because they didn't want to be associated with somebody who took a stand, a biblical stand on homosexuality. Obviously your church is willing to take that stand. Many churches are caving in and not taking a stand at all. There's the latest news. National Health Service to give sex change drugs to 9-year-olds. Okay, 18th of May 2014. The clinic is accused of playing God with treatment that stops puberty. What's the logic? Well, you see, in our pro-homosexual world, they want kids to have their sexual growth hormones suppressed long enough so they can choose whether they want to be male or female or transgender or what. By the way, if you think that through, it means that they know there are certain parts of your body that do determine whether you're a boy or a girl, and they want you to suppress that. So you can make a choice which is not the one your body is choosing for you. Interesting world we live in. Royal College of Psychiatrists has recently made a statement on sexual orientation. Notice the date, April 2014. These are the headline news bits. The Royal College of Psychiatrists considers that sexual orientation is determined by a combination of biological and postnatal environmental factors. Now, if you can figure out what they mean by that, you go for it. But they're sort of aiming broadly. But then if you keep reading, you read this. It is not the case that sexual orientation is immutable or might not vary to some extent in a person's life. And of course, what they're hinting at is that if you grow up a boy, you can then choose to be a girl. But in reality, what they've just done is, if you think you're homosexual, it is not predetermined. You can choose to not be.